Hey, everybody, and welcome to Mega Shift. Really excited to have you join us as listeners, and really excited to have Stephen and Andrew on the Trendcast today on Mega Shift from Keyboard. Keyboard is a new developer tool focused on improving developer experience in the MCP space, Model Context Protocol. So we brought Andrew and Stephen on to talk a little bit about what they're working on, their company, and unpack this new emerging space of MCPs. So how are you guys doing? Hey, Stephen. Hey, Andrew.
Hello, Rob. Great to be here.
Awesome. So, Stephen, you and I met through a family friend, and it turns out you were working on this really cool developer tool. Andrew, I think you and I have some background from the coding school days, so it's really great to have you guys on. Now, Keyboard, you're making a startup in a really exciting space, in the AI space. So could you tell me a little bit about how you two met and what made you want to start this Keyboard developer tool company together?
Yeah, definitely. So the background on this is that Stephen and I actually met during Techstars, and we were actually in a completely different space, but it was AI related. So it was in developer documentation where, engineers, they love writing code, but not all of them love developer documentation. So Stephen actually was one of my Techstars mentors at Stripe, and that's sort of how we actually got together. Or at least that's my telling of it,
No, and 100%. Andrew comes from Okta, founder, technical background, solutions engineer, and turned founder in residence. I sort of got startup bug and joined Techstars as a solo founder. And I was at Stripe at the time after kind of a career on the business side of startups, full time in VC, business school in between. And was very plugged into the Techstars network. And, if nothing else, obviously Stripe is an amazing company, but if nothing else, they are known as sort of having the best developer documentation in the business. And so something I was acutely aware of, and they really pound in your head when you're at Stripe, is how important developer experience is, and namely the documentation, which is sort of the gateway to the developer experience. And so when Andrew came to me and was like, hey, I'm trying to build software to make everyone else's docs as good as Stripe's, it really resonated with me. And I spent, Andrew, what was it? We probably spent about 6 months a year kind of in that sort of, a mentor is just the Techstars term of it, but really so just to kind of develop the friendship. Andrew's in the Bay Area, I'm in New York. And so, we'd actually met in person a few times throughout that journey. And fast forward a year from when we met, I sort of decided to jump ship and join him on the journey. But it was really through Techstars that started it off.
Nice. That's awesome. So it's really great you both bring your background and experience of working at Stripe and Okta to this project, to this company, and you kind of have a co-founder you can hit go to market with, and that's really exciting. So love that story. It's really great to see that community side of the startups and accelerators and how it can really build those lasting relationships and of course create a lot of value for folks. And so some of our viewers might not necessarily know about all that's happening in the AI space or the term MCP. So zooming kind of way out, if one of you wants to talk a little bit about what Keyboard does and maybe some of that background context about what's happening in the AI space and why essentially where Keyboard sits in that emerging landscape.
We were chugging along with the documentation product. We had some customers, and classic startups. It wasn't growing fast enough. Some tailwinds from point AI solutions turned into headwinds, especially when it comes to developer tool. And then when MCP came out a year ago, we kind of wanted to experiment with them internally, but coming from Stripe and Okta, and our previous product touched our customers' code, so we were very security focused. Andrew actually on a weekend side project kind of spun this up for us to use internally to securely use MCP servers, which essentially just connect your AI to your tools so they can execute tasks. And so Andrew, if you want to kind of talk through that and the genesis of that, I think you're better positioned than me.
Well, a big thing when you're doing a startup is you sort of figure out unique ways to market it. So with developer documentation, one thing that sort of happened is okay, how am I going to get people excited about developer documentation? So I decided to make a YouTube series where Like I would learn a new technology every week just by reading developer docs. And the first one was the Model Context Protocol server. And then I think it was like hopeless for me to work on anything else after that. Cause like I finished the tutorial in 15, 17 minutes. And sort of like what Stephen said, right? Like what the Model Context Protocol a server protocol actually does, right, is it lets you take something like Claude or like an AI agent and just sort of say like, hey, I want you to not just like answer a question. I want you to go out and do something real, whether that's create a Google Doc, make a presentation, And I think like as soon as I did that first example, it's just like when you think as like someone that's building something and like what the future of technology is, it's very hard to like not think about where that goes, right? Like, because there's a little joke about engineers are trying to automate like all their work all the time. This is sort of like the end all to that, right? But I would say that's sort of like where it sort of came from. I think that's what you were referring to, right, Stephen? Like how it's
No, 100%. And so it started as a weekend project and turned into a tool we use internally. And as we were going through those struggles, I say struggles, but sort of let's just say the startup journey with the initial product. Again, we did have some customers. We raised an initial round of funding. We hired our first couple employees, and things were kind of moving forward. But it just was getting harder and harder. We just got way more excited about this. And I think when it comes to startups, I think you need, customers, you need product market fit. Before that, you need to talk to a bunch of people, make sure you're actually solving problems. But I think more so than any of that, you need like a motivation is really hard, is pivotal, I should say. And at times in startups, the motivation comes and goes. And I think startup really only goes as far as founders' motivations go. And when, things were tough, this was kind of like a bolt of energy. And we just got really excited about it. And we started floating around with some customers and sort of friendlies. And it just became very clear through all that in the conversation that this was not only more exciting, but also a much bigger opportunity. And so we decided this summer to sort of wind down the last product and release Keyboard as more of an open source project, initially targeting developers because they were the ones who were experimenting with MCPs as it is sort of a technical product with a lot of code involved. But really the grand vision for this product is not just a developer tool. It's to enable sort of any person, no matter how technical or not, to really leverage AI in all the tools they use in all aspects of their work and sort of unlock that in a very secure way where the companies can actually govern and have sort of the similar level of control that they currently do with the SaaS apps. And that doesn't exist sort of in AI today.
Cool.
That's probably more information than you asked for, but sort of the journey.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. So kind of from a developer experience, maybe enterprise readiness standpoint, kind of what would you say is kind of the main problem it's solving right now in this MCP space?
Sure. Yeah, I can take that one, Andrew, and then let you dig into more of the how and the kind of where you see things going, because I think you're better positioned to answer that. But it's kind of two-pronged. First is, again, who's using MCP servers? It was a lot of hobbyists. We talked to a bunch of CTOs and engineering leaders who were in our network, and they were all like, we're not really doing it internally at the company, but on my weekend side project, I'm going to go. And kind of similar to how, Rob, you were like, oh, let me use this on some of my side projects I'm spinning up. And that's sort of who was experimenting with MCPs. We're like, we need to kind of, skate to where the puck is going or go to where the people who are actually interested in this stuff are. And so the initial product that we're in the process of bringing to market and open sourcing is sort of an unlimited productivity tool. And so the one-liner would be Keyboard's an open sourced universal MCP server that enables you to securely connect all your apps to any AI client. So you can use AI with all of your existing tools privately and locally and in a very secure way. And so it's sort of an individual productivity tool. We launched that. We got some good feedback, have a couple of users are in the process of going through iterations on that product. But something that really interesting that came up when talking to folks there is there's a much larger opportunity we see, which is sort of an orchestration layer in between a company's data and apps and their AI. Because today there's very little governance once you connect an MCP server, and Andrew can certainly talk more about this in a minute. You're exposing that to all of your data. And it's hard to sort of limit what that has access to and what it doesn't in a similar way. The best way to put it, or the best way that I've heard that was told back to us, is that when you hire a junior employee, you don't give them access to all your data. When you think of AI as sort of a junior employee or something to kind of automate repetitive tasks and things of that nature, right now it has access to all your data, but you don't want that. And things can get accidentally leaked and exposed. And so the technology that we built in this individual productivity tool can actually be applied and expanded out to more of a governance platform for the enterprise. And so right now we're going through cycles there and kind of talking to like product managers, some developers, and go-to-market engineers, which is an interesting kind of segment on the individual productivity side to continue that feedback. But really the larger play, we're starting to not do engineering work, but do some mock-ups and start to float that with some larger companies to try to secure a few design partnerships there. Nice.
Thanks. Yeah, Andrew, feel free to add any color there. And, as you kind of talk about, as Stephen spoke about kind of the what you're building and the why you're building it, maybe you could add a little color about, what it is and how kind of it fits into a developer's workflow or the workflow of some of these other maybe less technical folks.
Yeah, so I think if the question is like essentially what it is, right, is you can sort of think of it as sort of like a bridge between like, let's say something like a ChatGPT or like a Claude, right, where we're like talking to our like AI and all that great stuff, but then you're like, okay, I need to go create a Google slide presentation or some crazy stuff. We like even asked it to do is like, hey, I want you to do I want you to like stitch together like a video for me. So since we're like recording a podcast, I got it to say like, hey, look at like a video and like edit it for me and add slow motion effects, right? When you think about like Claude and ChatGPT right now, if you're like, make my video slow motion, they'll say like, what are you talking about? Right? But then when you implement something like Keyboard, you actually give your chat client like Claude or ChatGPT the ability to go and do all this custom work and all this custom logic. I don't know if that was a succinct explanation of it, but hopefully that makes sense. Is like, how do we allow our AI providers to actually go out and do things for us, right? So Keyboard is sort of like that solution that allows you to do it. But I think what you're going to see, Rob, is there's going to be a lot of solutions that come out in the next couple of months that sort of like make that claim. And I think the difference is that both me and Stephen have come from like, huge companies like Stripe and Okta, where like security is like a thing and privacy is a thing. So the way we're trying to build this is in a very zero trust like way, right? Where it's like, we want to make sure we build it in like the most secure way that people can like go out and have this unlimited productivity, but also feel good at the end of the day that like, things are as private as we can try to make them be, or as secure as we can try to make them be without limiting like the use cases. Now, it's a hard job to do. Like, how do you give unlimited productivity and also think about things like privacy and security? But it's like a core component of what we're trying to do with Keyboard. But does that make sense? I'm happy to like drill down into anything if you need.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. So, and it definitely piques my interest and, want to talk through some of the details. So kind of like, if chat length and tokens might be the currency of a Claude or a ChatGPT, or, eventually if you ask it at so many things, like, somebody will hit a pay limit or, so I guess like just kind of as we look at what Keyboard is doing, I know it's open source and available for developers, maybe like, is a currency or, way that it's unlocking that unlimited productivity? Is that through like APIs? Is that through different, kind of chat agent to agent, kind of what's the basic application kind of architecture or things that folks might want to know to unleash that productivity? What, I guess, how are you doing this?
Well, I think like if I can reframe the question, like the question is like, how are we unlocking that unlimited activity? And then a couple great things you brought is like token limit and token change. So this is both true for keyboard, chat, like OpenAI and then Anthropic. We're constantly changing, we're constantly iterating. So like anything I say like today might be like both for keyboard or OpenAI or Claude. Like who knows, maybe we'll pivot into a car company or something, you know. But like I'll speak to that is like, you know, so like MCP was the true unlock for unlimited productivity. And like there's a couple things people say MCP is the same as like an API, and you hear a lot of those conversations, and like, no, not really, because it's a standardized way for like Cursor, Claude Code, Claude, ChatGPT can now speak the same language. Like protocols are all about standardizing like things, right? So that's one thing, right? The other thing that a lot of people are not thinking about is like, what's the difference between like having an MCP server do AI work instead of me calling the OpenAI API? Well, the OpenAI API actually charges you, right? So when you're building out a system, in the back of your head, you're thinking, how do I create the most efficient system, and how do I like de-risk it? Or maybe I'm the only user of like this service, you know, versus MCP is like, no, we actually connect to your Claude account or your OpenAI account, and people are either on the free trial plan or they're on a static fee where they pay $20 a month. Anything you build in MCP land isn't going to change how much they pay to Anthropic. Now that might change, like Anthropic might change that, or limits or things of that nature. I don't think they will, because I think what they're trying to do with MCP is like a lot of the gains that we've seen in AI has only really affected like engineers. You know, like if you ask who's using AI the most, my guess, and I could be wrong, is engineering departments. And we sort of confirmed that with a lot of people. You know, there's still a lot of like failings in like enterprise engineering, you know, where like AI isn't always as helpful. But if you talk to startup folks, how much they're using AI to actually do their work in engineering, they'll say, you know, you see tweets like this, 90% of my code base is coded by like Claude Code, or like I've seen some like accelerator people like brag about that or something, you know, almost like a badge of honor. But then I think like what Anthropic and OpenAI are trying to do with like MCP is like, okay, how do we give the rest of the people that are not engineers that productivity gain? And then also, how do we charge them a subscription for that? So I think like what they might lose in like metered usage, they'll gain back by basically capturing like every single knowledge worker in terms of like automation. But, you know, they're all very smart at what they do, but that's like my guess, right? Now where keyboard, and I strayed from your question, but the original question is like, how does keyboard unlock this unlimited productivity? Is, do you really want to install 100 MCP servers? So if you want to automate stuff in Linear or Salesforce, you got to install MCP server 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that gets really painful. Like that doesn't really scale. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, not only is that not going to scale in terms of like all the work I want to do, from a security perspective, like if I'm installing 100 MCP servers, it only really takes one bad MCP server to basically like corrupt the other 99, right? So like the more you install, the bigger like your security risk grows. So we want you to have that unlimited productivity, and we want to build in such a way where you're like, I'm not so stressed about this, or I'm not like second guessing my decision every time I install a new MCP server just because I wanted it to create like, I don't know, a linear ticket for me. But I'll stop there. Rob, is that helpful, or anything you want me to like elaborate on? I'm happy to. I'm a rambler, unfortunately.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. I think that it's a really great analogy, right? That the junior employee one you made, where it's like, you know, why would I give the bot access to my whole file system when I'm just trying to do one specific thing. And the industry is moving fast and it's moving swiftly. So who knows exactly where it will go, but I definitely resonate with what you shared about, the fact that, what if you could just have one as a bridge versus, like all these like individual ones running and having to manage most of the dependencies among them. So, I definitely see where you're going. And so you guys made the choice to open source it. Could you talk a little bit about, what that kind of oh yes moment was versus that oh no moment, and like kind of what the decision is for open sourcing, and as you kind of validate your product, what are some of the things you're doing in that space, and how is open source like kind of part of that strategy?
Yeah. So I think the reason why we open source it is that I think something like this has to be open sourced. I think if we're interacting with your like applications and your like data, like the thing people should know is have a transparent view as like, as much as like you can, or at least like make it a core principle to try to like make transparency key and sort of see like, okay, you know what, this random startup that I never heard about before, why should I like trust them? And then we can say like, okay, the majority of our code is open source and you can exactly see what we're doing. And then hopefully you can keep us in check. Or you can personally tell me like, hey, I think you could be more secure if you did this, or you could be more private if you did this. I think a lot of companies out there are making the mistake of like, let's just like create this database and basically store everybody's API keys in there and just have them trust us or something. And it's all very good intention, but then it sort of increases like the risk of like, okay, a hacker now only has to hack one database or something, right? Or if someone like maybe vibe coded something, and for the record, I have no problem with vibe coding. I think the people that like put people down that's just sort of lame. But I will say, if you're like building an app, and you also work at the boot camp, like one thing I was actually like taught is like, how could your app be maliciously used against the users? How could like something you build not only help your users, but also harm your users, right? So I think what people don't think about is like, you might say like, hey, here's my app, put in your like credit card and pay me, right? But like, how could it harm your users, right? Are you doing right by them? So like, I think open sourcing it is like, we sort of know the potential that we're building might like change how people work forever, but we also know like what's at risk as well. So open sourcing is sort of like our commitment to like, hey, keep us in check. This is how we stay transparent with folks.
Nice.
Any other product, you could probably not open source it, but I think the stakes are too high here.
Totally.
The only thing I'll add there very quickly is that 100% true. And I think if that was the only case, we still would have open sourced. But like I said prior, is the people who were experimenting with MCPs, and this was a couple months ago, which in AI land is like 10 years, the way things are progressing. But we're open source developers, and the initial pre-Claude extensions and OpenAI or ChatGPT apps, all these MCPs were open sourced. And so who are we to come out and say like, hey, we want to talk to you open source developers, and we want you to try out our product, but we're not going to give the same transparency as you are. And so that was just another thing that pushed us over the edge. And but having said that, today the product's completely free. Open source. It's all done through Claude and ChatGPT coming soon. And then, but we are working on more of a deployed version, and then like talking through how we start to sort of charge users for this. And there's a number of things in the work there. And a lot of it has to do with sort of the admin and governance controls we had talked about. But like today, it's completely free. You can check out our GitHub, give us a star if you'd like, and go download it and test it out.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. So I know you both, Andrew and Stephen, you both made like a lot of product level decisions about the architecture and kind of how keyboard executes code on the user's behalf, right? And I know you're exploring some different options there. Right now you're using, I believe, GitHub code spaces. So, I guess kind of to regardless of what tool right now you're using to create that coding backend, maybe could you talk a little bit about what, how keyboard like behaves? And I'd love to hear Stephen kind of just talk a little bit about, in some of your initial conversations, like how are folks reacting, kind of what are folks saying, and as you kind of validate this along the way, what that looks like. So you can feel free to speak to either of those. Maybe we'll start with Stephen.
Yeah, sure. I think Andrew's definitely in better position. I could chat through the why GitHub code spaces, but he's the architect behind this, so he can chat through that. In terms of initial reaction, is it's been interesting. It's been again, it's like two-pronged, and that's in terms of the types of conversations we're having. But it's become pretty clear to us that the enterprise and the sort of IT admins / CISOs and CIOs, kind of the IT leaders, it's become pretty clear that like their employees want to use AI, like they're going to kind of have to keep up, but they are like concerned about how to do it, and so they are interested in a tool like Keyboard, and that's on us to still validate like what that looks like from sort of a top down, like how do I govern and control this. On the bottoms up side, we initially talked to a bunch of developers because that was our network, and we found that Keyboard actually maybe isn't from a individual like side project and like personal projects useful. From in their workplace, they don't really need it. There's like other AI tools that are more helpful in terms of like code reviews, documentation, generating code, implementing the CI/CD, and that was the world we previously played in. So that was our network. But what's interesting is then we've been talking to a lot of product managers, and this was Andrew's idea, and the feedback there has been great because these are people who are juggling. If you think about a product manager's role, they're in between multiple different stakeholders. And so they're in GitHub, they're in Jira or Linear with their developers. But then on the other end, they're in sort of Notion or Confluence, trying to like explain that knowledge to the rest of the company or their customers. You are a PMM, and so like I'd consider that as part of the extension of the product role. And they're building decks, and they're trying to kind of be in that bridge between the business and the technology. And the initial reaction has been great. And it's still small. It's not like we're out here saying we have tens of thousands of users, but somewhat intentionally small. And I think we're getting to the point where we're ready to. They've helped us, you included, Rob, with a lot of sort of UI, UX. How do we make this even more intuitive and things like that? But in terms of we're going through those cycles and going to do more of a marketing push soon. But the initial feedback from the pure technology is like this is really helpful. And that's really exciting, and I think what continues to motivate us, let alone, we're our biggest users internally, which is really exciting. And so it's unlocked a lot of gains there. But in terms of the architecture and kind of why decisions were made there, Andrew, I can pass that to you.
Yeah, I think it's like the question was like on the architecture of it. So we actually did some work with GitHub Codespaces at like docs.dev. We're trying to play around with like what does interactive documentation sort of look like when you actually execute code. And that was sort of like, that always sort of stuck with us. It's like, okay, we need a place to execute code. And then the thing with Keyboard, like, how does it work is that like AI really, like when you think about like how does AI know how to get something done, it actually uses code. So you actually, if you go back and look at Anthropic demos or OpenAI demos, you'll actually see like the models actually get things done with code. So then the next question is like, okay, where does this code get executed? And then like one no-no is like, you don't want it all to execute on the same server. You don't want like all the code to happen on one server, because you don't want like, if Steven's a malicious actor and he decides to execute malicious code, you don't want to happen on like a server where you're like, oh, it's happening on one server and it takes down the whole infrastructure or something like that, or other issues. So then we sort of said like, okay, how do we make sure each user gets their own like server that's ephemeral, that's temporary, and that doesn't have any sensitive, like, it doesn't have like your tax returns on it or something. Like, we don't want it to run on your local computer. And then I thought, what do most developers have? A GitHub account, right? And then how's that GitHub account secured, or how is a GitHub code space, which is really just a Linux server, secured? It's already got like GitHub authentication and security built in. So it just made the most sense. Like if you're a developer, there are probably some people that don't have GitHub accounts and they like, they say, I hate GitHub, but the majority of people have GitHub accounts. So we're like, this is a very natural place to start because security's there, privacy's there, isolation's there, best practices are there, But does that make sense of like, not that we're tied to GitHub code spaces, but like this is like, it made sense for the first place to start is there.
Yeah. Getting to that MVP using the code spaces, like infrastructure, makes a lot of sense. And I think as you shared, like the design principle there is like every user gets their own kind of dedicated workspace where code is executing, and it's like, I'm going to use the word personalized, but it's dedicated to them. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. And thank you for explaining that concept of like the architectural design and kind of how everyone gets their own individual code space. I think that design principle makes a lot of sense. So, as we look at the speed of the AI space, there's so much happening right now. Like, what would be kind of your North Star if Keyboard is wildly successful in the next 3 to 5 years? What might that look like, and what are you guys aiming for right now?
Yeah, I can. Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think with most startup founders, we just want to build something like useful and helpful to people. So I think like in the immediate future, if someone gets like 3 or 4 hours of their day back, like working on something, like for example, Stephen and I, like we juggle a bunch of things, like doing a startup, right? Like if someone gets like 4 hours of their day back, and then they said, well, thanks Keyboard, really appreciate that, or that like really helped me out there. That's huge for us, right? I think like in the future, right? Like if that compounds and it's just not one person, it's like 1 million people or 10 million people or 20 million people, and people can like do great work still using AI, right? Because we believe like AI like really is something that's great for the benefit of humanity, right? But if people just get like, all that time back and they also still get great work, I think that's sort of like our North Star. And I think the thing I would add on that is like without losing the peace of mind of like, oh, you know what? I use this tool and now like I'm worried about like where my data is going, or like I've done an anti-pattern or something there. But Stephen, I know you wanted to also talk to it as well,
No, same answer. I think yours is a little bit better from a super macro level, but if you then translate that into a business, right? Sure, individual productivity is amazing and helping people get hours in their day back and really eliminating like the mundane, boring tasks, whether it's from personal life or work life. That's amazing. But if you think from a business perspective, that last thing you said was really important is like, hey, I'm a company with 1,000 people. If I can get all of them an hour or two back a day, that's incredible efficiency gains. We can either do more work, or we can just like move a lot faster. But doing that in a peace of mind way where I'm not worried about this like sacrificing any privacy or security or data, but still getting that, like sign me up. And that's where Keyboard can plug in. And that's where, we could charge for a little bit of that efficiency gain. Obviously we're a startup and we raise venture capital, so money has to come into play, but I do see it as a world where it's we can provide great value to our customers and users by giving that peace of mind, but unlocking the productivity gains that MCPs and AI enables. And I think there's a little bit of a behavior shift that's going to need to happen, which is why this has been a little bit slower of an adoption curve in terms of MCPs came out and then companies weren't using it right away just because of these security risks. But I think over time, we're going to start to see people more and more offload tasks to AI. And kind of that's the bet we're making, and that in 3 to 5 years, people, when you go to your computer, you're maybe not opening up your browser and opening up 10 tabs just to start your day and your Slack and X, Y, and Z. You're just logging in and opening up, be it keyboard standalone chat app, be it ChatGPT, be it Cursor, be it Claude. You're opening that up, and you can run your 90% of your workday through that one app. And that's kind of the future we envision, and that we're playing towards.
Nice. Yeah, well, so both of you have this awesome experience from the startup accelerators and advising startups. So kind of what would be one piece of advice for founders that are thinking about building AI tools right now? What would be one piece of advice for those founders or those watching?
I think this is sort of like two-pronged advice. And I don't know if it's like the best advice, but I think it's just like, if you're building something in like AI, like definitely think about like doing right by your users. So what I mean by that is like, there's a bunch of shortcuts you can take, and you can build like some AI tool and you can charge for it, and you can build it in a very like slapdash way, right? But at the end of the day, if someone's going to like use your like AI tool, there's a lot of ways that it could like go wrong, right? So like take a step back and just sort of say like, okay, you know what? If I'm building like this tool to like help people, how do I actually build it in the right way? So like the reason why I say this is like sort of maybe not the best advice is like, maybe the easiest way to revenue is, you just vibe code something in like half an hour and you like YOLO it and here's the Stripe link. But I think if you are building with like AI, is like you're basically using a technology that's undeterministic. So what I mean by that is like there's like a billion scenarios that could go wrong when you're building AI. You might build like a documentation like tool, and for some reason it's like creating like app code for some reason. So I think there needs to be a little bit more diligence and thought into building like AI tools like the right way. But I'm biased because I came from like Okta. So like I think the reason why me and Stephen are so like it makes sense for us to build Keyboard is we think about a lot of these thoughts of like, okay, how do we build a solution that really gives people this unlimited productivity, but peace of mind, I think, is like super key. So I know it is enticing to just go into Cursor or Claude Code and say, whip me up a $200 million AI company, make no mistakes, not even look at the code or think about like what could go wrong and just like deploy it. But please, I implore you, think about doing right by the people that use your tools. And that goes double for me, is just like I gotta stay honest and try to think about like, as we build this, doing right by people. So probably not like the easy road advice that most people would expect, but that's just my 2 cents on it.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah. And Stephen?
Yeah, that's great. I think from again, Andrew's the more technical one of us two, and so he's in the weeds on the actual kind of building the AI tools. Obviously, I'm involved in other ways, but I would come at it from another angle and just say like, get out there and talk to people. It's so easy to sit behind your desk and make a bunch of predictions and hypotheses and just build. But, and this is some mistakes that we've previously made too. It's almost better to, I guess the piece of advice that I got when I was first starting is that first time founders focus on product, second time founders focus on distribution. And so, you can have the best product in the world, but if no one knows about it, or you're building a product for a problem that only 2 people experience, that's not going to make a good company. So you want to get out there and sort of validate as much as you can, spending a little effort as possible on the product, and make sure you actually understand that you're building something that at the end of the day people do want. And I think, say what you will about YC, they have a great saying that I think at the end of the day, what is a startup? How do you make a startup successful? You have to start by building something that people actually want. And the way you do that is by going out there and talking to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great saying and a great place to, I think. And you guys, either of you have anything you want to share that we haven't talked about?
No, this is awesome. I appreciate you having us on, Rob. Thank you for doing this. It's I've benefited from watching a lot of videos like these. I did take a look at a few of yours as well. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for the time.
Cool. Well, thank you both. Thank you to Stephen and Andrew for building Keyboard and joining us on the Trendcast today. Great to see you guys. So thanks everybody for tuning in to Mega Shift. We'll catch you next time.